We have got to stop saying there is one set of rules for us and another set for everybody else. Let me just tell you, as a rule of thumb, anytime you see anybody in politics, in business, anywhere, who's basically making a statement they want one set of rules for them and another set for everybody else, a red flag should go up in your mind. And that's exactly what we've been saying. So she'd be great at that. She represented our country in over 80 other countries when I was president. I still have people tell me all around the world about the good things she did. I was in Senegal where these people came in from the country to see me in Dakar in their brightly colored dresses, the ladies, and a few of their brave male supporters, to thank me because Hillary was the only world figure that ever stood by them when they tried to end generation after generation after generation of female mutilation practices that had degraded the women and degraded the girls. I was in Cambodia at an orphanage where my foundation keeps about 320 kids alive with AIDS, and this volunteer at the orphanage, this was like 2007, 6. 11 years later, this woman comes up to me in Cambodia and says, when your wife spoke at the International Beijing Women's Conference and told the Chinese and the world that women's rights were human rights, it changed life in our village forever, and we knew we had to send our girls to school and demand equal opportunities and equal participation. I have people, so she can do that. But there's also the other side of this. We have to say to the world we're going to practice diplomacy with friend and foe alike and use military force only as a last resort, not the other way around, and we have to prove it by what we do in Iraq. She thinks it's time to bring the troops home. But it is very important. It is very important that those of us who cheer when this is said not look like we're rooting for Iraq to fail. Nobody wants it to fail. Hillary's position is we have to do it because it's necessary and right for America. It's actually right for Iraq, and it is absolutely essential if we're going to save the moderate Muslim democracy in Afghanistan and continue to combat the al-Qaeda there. All three reasons. We lost our 400th casualty in Iraq, 4,000th casualty in Iraq this week, you know. We had almost 70,000 people wounded there. And we've been there longer than we were in World War II. The Army deployments are 15 months now, longer than they were in World War II. Last week there was a massive study showing that mental health problems for members of the armed services go way up as they're required to do a second, a third, a fourth deployment, and family violence and family breakup go up too. We have used the Army, the Marine Corps, the National Guard, the Reserves, all our ground forces up, and we are now training Navy reservists and Navy personnel in Army infantry tactics and deploying them to the Iraq theater. We have got to stop this. She wants to bring the troops home. And here's her plan. I want to make full disclosure here. Her plan is, if nothing changes between now and election time, she would give the Joint Chiefs a little time to come up with a plan to begin withdrawing troops within 60 days at a brigade or two a month. Consistent with our obligation to protect 100,000 Americans that are there, civilians, and the Iraqis who have been our allies. One of my daughter's best friends has told Hillary and I many times he won the Bronze Star for Valor at Fallujah. And he joked that he was the only Jewish Democratic captain in the Marine Corps. That wasn't quite true, but close enough, I think. Anyway, he's a marvelous man. He's now a human rights advocate, stayed through his captaincy. But he said, you know, we would have lost our people in the droves if it hadn't been for our Iraqi translator. We can't leave those people behind. We can't let them be killed. I do not understand why the Bush administration has been so reluctant to bring the Iraqis to America. After all, it is their policy that got them in trouble. If they put their lives on the line, I would hope that all of you, no matter how much you may oppose this war, believe we have a moral obligation to let the people who saved our people's lives come to America with us. I think it's very important. And finally, Hillary believes that we should leave a small contingent of special forces, probably up in the north in the Kurdish area where there's no fighting, to be available to counter the al-Qaeda. Because they are the adversary. They did kill all those people on 9/11. They have killed thousands of people since, just not in the United States. And they want a third war in the Middle East, and they want to stop the Israelis and the Palestinians from reconciling. And if they do that, if we can make a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, half the energy will go out of the fight against terror all over the world. But we have to be able to guarantee the security of that man holding that flag there. And the Palestinian state. I don't know how many endless hours I sat in meetings in the White House when I was president, when the Israelis and the Palestinians would agree that if they ever could get a deal, they would both be targeted for 3 years. So that's our plan. But you've got to bring the rest of them home. It's the right thing for the Iraqis. What do they have to decide? Read the papers today. What are they trying to decide? How to split the oil money, how to share the political power. We cannot make those decisions. People don't make hard decisions till they have to. If we do what Senator McCain says and tell them we're prepared to stay 100 years, then 99 years from now, your great-grandchildren will be reading stories about how we sure hope they'll figure out how to split that oil money. You just intuitively know that, don't you? If they know we have to come home, then we'll get more help from the UN, more help from other people, and they will be under pressure to reconcile their political differences. If we stay forever, it'll be a lot of trouble. I'll give you just one example in your own experience that you can imagine. If your next door neighbor's house burned down and your neighbor had nowhere to go, you'd take your neighbor in, wouldn't you? Just about everybody would. Even if you had no bed, if your neighbor had to sleep on the couch, you'd take your neighbor in. A month would be fine. Most of us would let our neighbor stay for 6 months. But if your neighbor is still on your couch after 5 years, what do you know? It's not about the fire anymore. It's about not having to get off the couch. That's where we are in Iraq. It is time to bring our forces home. But we have to do it in the right way. Look, the Commandant of the Marine Corps said 2 weeks ago, not Hillary or Senator Obama, the Commandant of the Marine Corps said, look, I know we need 3,500 more Marines in Afghanistan to fight the Al-Qaeda. I will send them, but I can't leave them there very long unless you let me bring the Marines home from Iraq. We have an army to rebuild. In every single way, the military's readiness is lower than it was the day I left office. We can't get people to re-enlist. We can't get people to sign up. The Pentagon's so broke, they tried to get the signing bonus back from the soldiers that couldn't do all their 4 years because they got wounded. That was really dumb. And Hillary and the Republican senator from Alabama on the Armed Services Committee with her, they sponsored a bill to make sure the soldiers got to keep their signing bonus. And that was a good thing they did. But the point is, that shows you how strained it is. If you want American diplomacy to work, we've got to have the finest military in the world as a backup, and it is wrong what has been done to them. It's got to be rebuilt. So for all those reasons, this needs to be done. But it needs to be done in the right way. I think it is very interesting that the first woman candidate for president has more military endorsements than anybody else. 2 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 34 retired generals and admirals, all supporting her. General Wes Clark called me on the phone today to talk to me about a military issue, and they just trust her. They think she'd be great. She's the only member of the Armed Services Committee running. When the Republicans were still in the majority, the Pentagon asked her to be the only senator on a small committee to plan the future of the military in the 21st century. This is a big deal. You got to pick the right commander-in-chief to make the right kind of peace. And finally, the third reason I think you ought to pick Hillary is she's a great change maker. And as I said before, the change here in the candidates will be earth-shaking whatever happens. But what matters is what change will be made in your lives. Ever since I met her, I think she's the best I ever saw at looking at a problem and figuring out how it could be made better. We were in law school. Everybody else was dying to get out. God, we've been in school forever. We were up to ears in debt. People just wanted to get out. Not her. She spent another year at the hospital because at that time there were no protections for American children from severe abuse and neglect. And she was telling me stories every day about seeing kids with cigarette burns in their arms and children that hadn't been fed in a week. She said, we've got to do something about it. So she took a year of her life to work with other people to come up with some guidelines. And now every state in the country, every state protects its children from that kind of abuse and neglect. She was making changes in other people's lives when she was your age, young.